This is Jeff Davis with the Alignment Podcast, where we explore sales and marketing alignment strategy for B2B businesses. Make sure to visit jeffdavis2.com for all things alignment. Now let's talk about how to create togetherness.
Today's guest is Mike Russell, content marketer at Pivotal Writing. He helps marketing leaders at enterprise SaaS companies ignite more sales conversations by utilizing customer success stories. In our conversation, we discuss the best ways marketers can connect with sales to produce better content, what content must achieve to be relevant to the modern buyer, the process you must follow to produce aligned messaging that leads to higher value conversations with buyers, and when you should audit your current content library. With that said, let's jump into the episode.
Mike, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. It's a privilege to be here.
I am excited to have a conversation with you because I really want to talk about content and messaging and how we improve the conversations that we're having with customers and prospects. And I think you're going to really have a great perspective based on your background and some of the work that you're doing. Like I do with all of my guests, before we get into that, let us have you introduce who you are and the work you're doing, as well as tell us why you think sales and marketing alignment is important for B2B businesses today.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Mike Russell from convertwithcasestudies.com, and I write case studies for B2B SaaS companies that excite prospects for the sales conversation. And I've come to this point after about 10 years of freelance copywriting. In that time, I've written everything from white papers to industry reports to blog posts. And so I have a very tactical view of the topic here in the Alignment Podcast. So as far as the question of why alignment is important in the B2B space, I think it's the only way to grab the attention of prospects who need your help but are so distracted with everything else going on in their lives that they may miss your message if it's not well aligned.
So we've had several conversations ourselves as well as other folks within the space, and I see a disconnect between the messages that stereotypical salespeople in the B2B space are having with prospects. Because we know, obviously, the buyers nowadays are so tech savvy and so tech enabled that a lot of times they're already through a good part of the sales process, that when we come to them, we have to have a really cohesive message that resonates. So from your point of view, what should good content be trying to achieve in today's selling environment?
Well, before I got into copywriting, I was on a track to be a teacher. So I am totally biased as a content marketer. And I think that the best solutions should rise to the top. The best ideas should rise to the top. And so in that spirit, good content should educate the reader. They should help the reader understand their problems and make the best possible decision to resolve them. If the content is doing that, then I think that everything else will fall into place behind it. Build trust, build brand reputation, and convince prospects that you are genuinely interested in helping solve their problems.
And so this may be directed more to our marketing listeners, but how do you create content that talks with the prospect versus talks to a prospect? Help us understand how we do that.
So I don't think that this will be a concept that's very foreign to the sales listeners. You just need to show that you are interested in helping the prospect solve their problems rather than just trying to pitch them on whatever your solution is. And the way that you can go about doing that with your marketing collateral, in my experience, is recognize that prospects don't care about your solution. They care about solving their problems. And so if you produce all your collateral, and I would think that if you would position your conversations with prospects in the context of what are your problems and trying to understand that first, then when you produce content or speak to them, you're showing that you're more interested in helping them solve their problem. And in a written piece, because you can't actually engage with the reader in the same way. It is one way in a certain respect. By anticipating their questions and concerns and doubts, you're showing that you're listening to them. And I think that would make them a little more open to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, I like that. So it's focusing on more about the solutions and the problems that they are facing versus the products, your product, features, benefits, etc.
That's it.
So if you look at the gamut of options that we have as far as it goes to content, in your experience, what types of content are resonating the most? Help us understand how to prioritize where we should be spending our efforts.
So in the 10 years that I've been writing content, I've written white papers and blog posts and trade articles and case studies. And in my opinion, case studies are the pieces of content that best resonate with prospects. And I'll explain why in a second. But first, I just want to clarify that I'm not talking about a kind of case study that I'm sure all listeners have seen, which is kind of just a rehash of marketing messaging with a thin veneer of customer story bolted on top of it. Maybe it's just a testimonial at the end of the piece. I'm talking about an authentic journalism quality story about a client's struggle with a problem that your reader is facing, and an insightful exploration about how the hero of the case study overcame that problem with a vendor's help. So why do I think that that is the most effective kind of content available in sales conversations? Well, for one, I've done the research, and survey after survey, year after year, case studies regularly rank as one of the most influential pieces of collateral. Demand Gen's B2B Buyers Survey Report, Content Marketing Institute's B2B Content Marketing Survey, even Forrester Research have all recognized that, case studies are at or near the top of the list. It fluctuates from year to year, but case studies really, they stay up there from one year's surveys to the next. From my perspective, I think that the good kinds of case studies that I've described earlier, they substitute for a conversation between your prospect and your happy customer. Your customers are busy people. They can't field every reference call that you might ask of them. And so if you can write up their story in an engaging way, that piece of content is just going to work for you year after year and sales conversation after sales conversation. And on that note, because it's from a third-party perspective, it supports your sales and marketing messaging. If the reader can really see that their problem featured in the story through the experience of the hero, then this is not unlike how we like to watch movies and associate with the hero of the movie. Well, then the story, the problem, and more importantly, the solution featured in the story is going to resonate more with the reader. It's going to be more memorable, and it's, as I said earlier, it's going to cut through the noise. And then one last reason is that, we're social creatures. So at the end of the day, we want to understand how others have solved the problems that we're going through now. And we're a lot more inclined to believe what a peer recommends to us than someone who isn't a peer.
So talking about case studies, was there any difference in the type of customer personas as far as which content resonated best? Was there any delineation between that, a CEO versus a CFO or some type of other buyer within an account?
The ideal would be for the case study to feature the target prospect as the hero of the story. And so if you're selling to CEOs, then the case study needs to feature a CEO, or at least have a statement from the CEO, because of course they're busy people.
Right.
If you're talking about IT managers and selling to them, well, then the case study needs to feature them as the hero. And so, you do need to have some variability. And I believe that a case study can feature two people, ideally. One would be the decision maker, and then one would be the end user, if those are different people. And of course, the end user might have a little more time available for a case study interview, so they might feature more prominently in the case study. But then if the decision maker even just gives a testimonial that appears as a pull quote or as an end of the case study, that could be a nice validator for the busy decision maker who would be skimming that case study to decide whether or not to continue a sales conversation.
So it's a good point. So as a CMO or a marketing manager, I may look at my customer personas. Let's say I have 3 of them within a vertical. I may then want to map a case study with that particular customer persona and then help my sales team to understand, as you're interacting with Joe, the CFO, or whoever your target customer is, this particular case study may resonate with that person because it really features somebody that they can identify with and help them see themselves as becoming, quote unquote, the hero, within their organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it substitutes for that conversation. Think of it in terms of, or it's replacing what might happen at a trade show, for example, where two peers happen to meet and start talking about the same problem. One has solved the problem, the other needs some advice. And so the person who has that problem is a lot more likely to accept the suggestion from the person who has overcome it already. And so if the case study is the conduit for that conversation between the person who's experiencing the problem and the one who has already overcome it, well, that's really valuable content. And I think that it's more likely to land, to kind of sink into the prospect's mind if it comes from someone whose opinion they trust, which would be one of their peers or even someone whom they look up to.
So I want to revisit this idea about messaging, because I think that two themes come to mind as we are talking, is that this consistent messaging and this compelling messaging to get in front of prospect, but also this idea of sales having higher level conversations and really being seen as strategic advisors. So walk me through, in your mind, the process as an organization I need to go through in order to help sales and marketing come together to create this messaging and have higher level conversation. Who starts that? What needs to happen in order for that to take place?
So I think that it really starts with the recognition that marketing's number one customer is the sales team. And so I would go to them and ask how they're currently using their customer success stories in the field. And it's not unlike listening to your customers, doing customer research and asking them how they're using your products, what benefit they're finding from your products, and then just if you find a pattern over time, then building that into your messaging. So again, how is sales team on the ground in the field using your success stories? With which audiences or personas are those case studies resonating the most? And where are they finding those case studies the most powerful in the sales cycle? And if you talk to a number of those folks, you're going to start to see some patterns emerge, and that would be a place to develop either more content about that persona or develop case studies that really hit on the questions that are coming up at that place in the sales cycle. The next point that I would make is that you have to be strategic about who you're choosing to profile in the case studies, because not all candidates are created equally in this case. It's kind of an extension of asking the right questions to get the right answers. You don't want to just take on anyone who's willing to appear in a case study. It's really a matter of quality over quantity, because case studies take effort and budget, and you want to get the most ROI for what you're investing into it. The system I'm going to describe, I feature on casestudyhero.co. So if anything's unclear, or if you're looking for a little more detailed example, head over to casestudyhero.co. So again, quality over quantity. You only need a handful of case studies per use case, because when someone has a particular problem, they're not going to wade through all of your collateral. At best, they're going to look at 2 or 3, in this case, case studies to help them understand how they can overcome this problem with your solution. A few exceptions might be that if you ever update the product, or you have a customer with an especially unique or impressive set of benefits, or your PR team just needs more case studies, well then, produce as many as you need to meet those criteria. Anyway, the system that I'm suggesting is basically a strategic needs assessment that would take place every year or half year, where you look at the case studies that you have available internally and externally facing, and then also any candidate case studies, any customers whose stories would be really impressive and helpful for your sales team. And so you would enter all of those different case studies, or just customer names, into the first column of a spreadsheet. And then the rest of the columns would cover the themes that you address in your case studies. And some of these are going to be complementary, some will be mutually exclusive. So for example, you might have a column about the product or service that you feature in the case study, or the case study hero's industry, their size, if geography is important, Also, your sales team is going to have some ideas about what other themes come up in their sales conversations, and so those need to be represented in this spreadsheet. And then, who are the decision makers? Like we were talking about earlier, you might have different personas that you're trying to reach out to and sell to, and so you want to make sure that you have those addressed. Not evenly, but you need to keep them in mind as you're deciding how to move forward. And then if you also find out how the decision maker was influenced to go with you, that why statement is really powerful as well. So now you've got the first column, a number of rows with all of your current case studies, and then prospective case study candidates. And then in the columns, you have all the different themes or criteria that you might use in a case study. And then you just work the spreadsheet. So in each one of the rows, as you enter the product or service, or you enter the industry, you're kind of creating this at-a-glance profile for each case study in turn. And over the course of doing this for each of the case studies in your library or prospective case study that you might be able to produce, you're going to get a really clear vision of where you've got good coverage and where you've got gaps. And if you, in working in tandem with your sales team, you can decide that, yeah, we've got good coverage here. We don't need to allocate any more budget for case studies that feature a particular kind of product or feature a particular industry. But then you might find some gaps, and sales might help you determine that, yeah, we're actually, this year we're focusing on selling this product or selling into this industry. And since we've got these gaps in the case studies, would you, marketing department, please focus on producing more stories that fill those gaps?
Got it. Thank you for that framework. I think that is extremely helpful. So with that, I'm going to ask two last questions. Do you suggest that once we have come to the conclusion that we need to align sales and marketing and really hone in on the collateral we're producing, the messaging, all that sort of thing, do we do a collateral audit? And what does that look like?
Like I was saying earlier, I think that the arbiter of truth for any kind of decision-making process would start with what your customers are saying. It's easy to argue internally about strategy or messaging or execution. It's a lot harder to argue against the patterns that you're hearing from your prospects and customers. So to answer your question about whether you need to do a content audit, I would start with, determining what your customers and prospects are suffering with, and then with that in mind, look at your content and decide if you are addressing the pains that you're hearing.
Okay. So then from what you say, what I'm hearing is it's really about refreshing to understand really what our customers are telling us and where we are potentially needing to address. And then just reviewing the stuff that we're using or that we are, currently have in our arsenal. If it's not a fit anymore or it's not addressing that, maybe we consider either getting rid of it or doing a refresh of some type.
Absolutely. Yeah. I kind of think of content marketing as being a pruner of bonsai trees. You always want to trim the dead wood, and you want to create space for the new shoots that are showing a lot of promise and are kind of leading you in the direction that you want to go.
I like that visual of pruning. It's not necessarily getting rid of, but it's pruning so that we can develop, new things that better address what we need them to do. I like that. So last question for our conversation today. I like to ask this of all my guests. What is one key takeaway, whether it be a thing or a theme, that you want executives to keep top of mind as they are going along the journey of aligning sales and marketing from a content or collateral or even messaging standpoint?
Well, your sales team are talking to prospects every day, and I would say listen for patterns in, like I said earlier, the pains that they're experiencing, and cross-reference that with the kinds of benefits that your customers are getting from your solution. And the patterns that emerge there is going to be a much better objective arbiter of truth for how to position your marketing and sales messages for creating more consistent stories.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your conversation today and your expertise around content and collateral and messaging and helping us think through this as we really try to bring these two teams together more holistically.
It's been my privilege, Jeff. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Don't forget to visit me at jeffdavis2, the number 2.com, and follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Davis2. Did today's conversation resonate with you? Then share with your colleagues to help the Alignment Podcast grow. Join us for the next episode where we continue to talk about how to create togetherness.